In 1969, an intense football match between the nations of El Salvador and Honduras escalated far beyond the goals scored on the field. It ignited a conflict that soon spiraled into a full-blown war, with what seemingly began as an innocent World Cup qualifier turning into 100 hours of fighting, dragging both nations into chaos. This incident was not merely about the game of football. It represented deep-rooted tensions and struggles that had long simmered beneath the surface. By the late 1960s, tensions had reached a boiling point between the two nations. El Salvador, while small in size, was densely populated, leaving its citizens in dire need of land for farming and living, as many of these chose to migrate to neighbouring Honduras in search of better opportunities. Resentment began to build among the locals who felt their resources were being stretched thin. This growing animosity was brought to head during a World Cup qualifier, where the football rivalry between the two nations became a dramatic backdrop for all frustration and anger that had been simmering beneath the surface. As the teams faced off, it wasn't just a game, it was a clash of cultures, histories that had far-reaching implications beyond the pitch. The first match of this intense rivalry kicked off in Tegucigalpa, Honduras. In a nail-biting finish, Honduras came out on top with a narrow 1-0 victory. But that triumph turned dark quick, as riots erupted later that night, showcasing the underlying tensions between the two nations. The following week, the scene shifted to San Salvador, where El Salvador dominated the game, winning 3-0. However, rather than easing the situation, this victory only exacerbated the unrest, escalating the violence that had begun to unfold. By the time the third and final match arrived in Mexico City, the atmosphere was incredibly charged. The stakes were higher than ever, leading to El Salvador to sever all diplomatic ties with Honduras just hours before the game kicked off. July 14, 1969, El Salvador launched a surprise air attack on Honduras. Fighter planes streaked across the borders, bombing airports and fuel depots to cripple Honduras Air Force before it could even take off. Within hours, Salvadorian tanks and infantry poured across the border, capturing small Honduran towns in a lightning assault. It was chaos. Honduran pilots scrambled to retaliate, hitting oil facilities and bridges deep inside El Salvador. Villages caught between the fighting were burned, and thousands of civilians fled their homes. The war was short, but brutal. Over 2,000 people were killed in just 4 days of combat, and all of it sparked by a football match, though the real reasons ran far deeper than a scoreboard. The Organization of American States stepped in to stop the bloodshed, and on July 20th, both sides agreed to a ceasefire. The guns fell silent, but the damage was already done. Entire towns laid in ruins, thousands were dead, and over 300,000 Salvadorians living in Honduras were forced to flee their homes. Families were divided by borders that suddenly felt like walls. The war became known as the 100-Hour War. It quickly ended, but its scars lasted decades, deepening mistrust and shaping the country's politics for years to come. In the end, football wasn't the cause, it was the spark. The real fire came from poverty, land disputes, and nationalism. But it was a game, something meant to unite, that finally set it ablaze. If you did enjoy, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Again, apologies for the pronunciations.